Hello one and all, welcome back to Behind the Desk, a podcast about my time in a recording studio. My name is John and today I want to give you an update on what's been happening at work. Just because the business has been a bit slow doesn't mean there's been nothing to do. And I can only see it getting busier from here. But before I begin, if you have any questions about what I mentioned today, or any related questions to the studio, then you can message me at Wellesley Media on Facebook or on Instagram. So, at the time of recording this episode, I've been going into the studio about 2 days a week to work on mixing and recording projects. We have had one or two rappers come in to record, but it has been solo sessions and everyone's kept their distance, especially the bosses, because, well, I haven't actually seen either of them in person since before Christmas. They come in the days me and the other intern are not, so they don't really have any chance of spreading it between everyone. Which is a pretty clever way to separate us without having to stop work entirely. Now, the work itself was a little boring at the start, I'm not gonna lie. For example, I was the only one going in for 2 weeks, and all I was doing was just making up orders and deliveries of merchandise for the record label Global Underground, which was a lot more complicated than before. I've already mentioned on a previous podcast the hassle these have caused in the past, and luckily these orders were nowhere near as bad, but most of them were just packaging CDs and shipping them to the right location. What the most challenging thing was trying to work out how to send all these things to EU countries. Because of Brexit, a lot more paperwork and numbers have to be added to every order. And again, it's not a terribly hard process, but it does make doing the orders take a lot longer to complete. I suppose that is what has happened with most of the jobs I've done or had to do since Christmas. The fact that it's a fairly simple process that's become twice as long, sometimes even longer to complete, because there's a lot more hoops and safety measures and additional work to do. I mean, I shouldn't complain too much though, because I am still able to do work and do some work experience. And I'm still able to go out to work, which I know for a lot of people is not the case. And for that, I'm really grateful. So, that's what my work looked like for the first few weeks after Christmas. Then, once all the orders were done, and we were on top of the record label merchandise side of things, we turned our attention to some maintenance at the studio. So really simple things like doing stock count, tidying storerooms, cleaning the studio in general, and just general stuff like that. Those weeks in particular felt a little redundant, because there was no real reason to go into the studio, but there was as well. Like, we were doing jobs that were important, but didn't feel important on the grand scheme of things. But that was just work at the studio. We also had to work at home as well. Now, you might be thinking, what on earth can you do to work from home for a recording studio? And my answer is, not a lot. But there is one job that's taken a long time to complete. And in fact, it's still ongoing. I've spent about 3 hours today doing them this morning. And that was sorting out royalty statements. Ooh, exciting. Now, this job is pretty important as artists need to know how much they've earned from CD sales, digital downloads, and streams from various platforms. But the process I had to complete was not as complicated as you might think. I don't have to personally calculate all the information. There's a website we use which works out all that stuff. However, whenever this site can't work out these statements, or there's an error in some way, that's when I come in. And all it is matching the correct statement to the correct artist or track code, essentially. Again, it's not a fun process and it is quite repetitive, especially when there's well over 2,000 different statements that we have to match manually. But the good thing about working from home is I get to choose when to work. Now, I know if I'm working from home, I should be doing a full day's work, but I don't think anyone should be staring at a screen for that long. and it's not an exhilarating process to do these royalties. So, I've been a bit cheeky, and I've only been doing about 4 hours a day, which I personally think is still enough to be productive. Plus, I don't feel guilty about not doing any work. Hopefully bosses think so too if they ever listen to this podcast, otherwise I might be in a bit of bother. But, moving swiftly on. There is one more thing we have been able to do during this lockdown. That is the chance to actually mix and record people. According to the Musicians Union, recording studios have been classed as essential work, and therefore we've been allowed to stay open. However, there hasn't really been much in the way of recording, oddly enough. The only people that have come in are a group of rappers that have a special contract with us, which basically means they can use the studio whenever they want. And when I say rappers, I mean one guy came in for 2 sessions. His name's Saga Boy. He's actually a really nice dude. I've worked with him before, and he's one of the easier people to record, because he usually knows what he's doing and what he needs to record. So the fact that the sessions were with someone easy to work with made the process a lot more fun. The fact that we can do any recording is fun at this point, and from these recording sessions, Saga Boy's managed to record 4 tracks, which has given us plenty of mixing to be getting on with. I spent a good few hours the other day working on this Afrobeat style track and getting to mess around with some plugins I don't usually have time for. Like the plugin that brightens up the high end without making it sound too harsh. It's called Fresh Air and it's a free plugin and it's really nice to use. I definitely recommend it. I've also been using the Aphex Exciter plugin and messing around with all the different settings to see what it can actually do. From what I can tell, I think this plugin could work really well on aggressive vocals, very grungy guitars and bass, because the type of distortion it has like this mean characteristic to it, in a good sense, and I think when the settings are right, it sounds really clean, which is an issue you always battle with distortion and exciters, because if it's too much, then you have to deal with all the muddy frequencies, which I personally find like really hard to separate, without a plugin adding more muddiness to the mix. So yeah, mixing these tracks has been really cool, but it's not the only tracks we've been mixing. There is also an EDM artist who has an EP of tracks that we've been asked to mix as well. And it's been cool to mix a different genre. I have been able to work more in Logic, which I don't usually do, and I quite like working in Logic, especially for this kind of music. And I think it'll definitely be helpful in my final year if I ever have to create some like EDM tracks or anything like that. In the studio, this has actually been a pretty cool process to work on as well, because I don't often get the chance to mix synths and electronic instruments, so it's a nice change of pace. The only challenging thing I would say in this whole process is the fact that we haven't been able to meet the artist in person due to lockdown. They haven't been able to come into the studio, which has meant every time we do revisions on a track, we need to send him a new version and then wait for him to reply on what he wants to change, which is already a challenge with artists, because I feel like people get extremely protective and possessive over their tracks, which makes them become perfectionists, which isn't a bad habit to have, but it does slow down the process of finishing a track and releasing it. And the process has already been slowed down because of other restrictions, which did make the mixing process a little less enjoyable. Hopefully the next track won't take as long to complete though, and that we'll be able to have people in the studio sooner rather than later. Other than that one thing, I still really liked mixing it. I definitely like working on this kind of music, and I look forward to working on more tracks like this, even the other ones from this artist, because they are really good tracks. They're the kind of tracks that make you just want to get up and dance, and you immediately bop your head when you listen to them, which is the sign of a good track, I think. Well, dance track at least. I don't think you'd be bopping your head to Bach or Beethoven. And that's all I've been up to from Christmas to now in the studio. It has been slow in a lot of places, but like I said, it's starting to pick up, and I think it won't be too long before things start going back to normal. So, thank you for listening to today's podcast. I hope you've enjoyed hearing what I've been up to. If you have any questions about anything I've mentioned today, or have any questions about any work I've done at Loft or for Global Underground, then you can message me at Wellesley Media on Facebook and Instagram. All that's left to say is, I've been John, and I'll see you all in the next episode.